Another time I had George Shearing at my table. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was a pianist and he's blind. Now, I mentioned earlier that all the service was butler service, but in this case, they had prepared a plate for him in advance. Now, also, one thing I didn't mention before is husbands and wives are always separated during a state dinner. In order to keep the conversation flowing, you don't want two people sitting next to each other that know each other. You want people to get to know, other people. But in this case, they allowed for his wife to sit with him to help him. So I brought the plate over, and apparently she was very impressed with it. And when I put it in front of him, she said, "Oh, George, look at that." I think you all know who this gentleman is. He was at my table one night. He was the host. Also at the table that night was Joe Montana. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was the quarterback for the 49ers back in the 80s when they were winning all those Super Bowls. And it's a really funny thing because you take somebody out of their comfort zone, and it's strange how they react. Now here's a guy who was used to performing, before thousands in the stadiums and millions of people around the country on TV. But in this situation, I could tell he was really scared. You could tell by his hands were kind of shaking. And I wanted to go over to him and put my hand on his shoulder and say, "It's okay, Joe, you'll be all right." Well, anyway, Frank was the host. And he was regaling the ladies at the table with a story about how he had punched out a reporter, put him in the hospital, called the hospital a few days later to find out when the poor fellow was getting out so he could go back and punch him out again and put him back in the hospital. Now, the ladies thought this was quite interesting. But I have to say, in Frank's defense, and this had never happened before, at least when I was there, and I don't know if it ever happened again, but he requested that the butlers, if they finished their work on time, be allowed to come down to the East Room that night and listen to the entertainment. So, needless to say, we rushed to get it done, went down to the East Room, and of course the entertainment was Frank Sinatra and Perry Como. So, can you imagine sitting in the East Room of the White House listening to two of the most famous singers of their generation and getting paid for it on top of it? That was a special night.